In Japan, a health crisis is unfolding. Residents are discovering toxic chemicals known as PFAS in their blood. And these substances are also being found in rivers and groundwater across cities. They're also called forever chemicals as they do not degrade over time and continue to accumulate in the body. Are you thinking about Japan's recent release of nuclear contaminated wastewater? Well, your concerns are genuine, but misplaced in this case. PFAS have nothing to do with that, since nuclear discharge typically contains radioactive substances like tritium, not fluorine. So where is this toxin coming from? Let's take a closer look at where these incidents are happening. Omori, Tokyo, Kanagawa, Hiroshima, and Okinawa. There, notice anything? Most are near US military bases. Why there are so many US bases in Japan is a story for another day. The point we focus on today is that they are there, and they're brazenly contaminating the Japanese land. The American Cancer Society warns that the exposure to PFAS can lead to tumors and cancers, and no amount of these toxins is deemed safe. But the levels being reported in Japan are alarming. In Hiroshima alone, PFAS levels are 300 times above the national safety limits. So the Japanese people are angry and scared. They're demanding action and urging their government to inspect these US bases and call for nationwide blood tests for PFAS. But Japan's hands are tied. Thanks to a 60-year-old pact with the US, Japanese officials can't even step foot on these bases, on their own soil. And this isn't the first time that the US bases have left their toxic marks. The painful US legacy of the Vietnam War lingers on even after 50 years of the war.
One of the most controversial American operations in Vietnam.
Just the name of it evokes all sorts of horrible images. Agent Orange.
The US military sprayed 20 million gallons of Agent Orange herbicide across Vietnam. The plan was pretty simple: wipe out forest cover and the crops to starve out resistance. Americans said it wouldn't have lasting harm, but the reality is quite different. Agent Orange wasn't just any herbicide. It packed dioxin, one of the deadliest chemicals known. It doesn't disappear. It sticks on surfaces, in the soil and in water, and from there it poisons fish, wildlife, and crops, climbing up the food chain and seeping into genes generation after generation. For example, Bien Hoa Air Base still screams toxicity, with dioxin levels more than 1,000 times over the global safety line. And by the mid-1960s, Vietnamese doctors were alarmed by a surge in babies born with deformities. Now, 5 decades on, the curse spans 4 generations. Infants are born with their organs exposed, missing limbs, eyes, and no one knows how long this will continue. While the US has owned up to 15 health conditions linked to Agent Orange among its veterans, it overlooks those directly hit by the spray. And the same applies to victims out in the Pacific, where a concrete tomb is holding back America's Cold War legacy. This is on the Marshall Islands, a paradise where the Marshallese thrived for thousands of years before the US dropped by and decided to use these small, remote islands as nuclear test sites against the Soviet Union. And then the inevitable happened. The US tested 67 nuclear bombs on the islands, including Castle Bravo, the worst radiological disaster in the US history, thousands of times more powerful than the explosion that flattened Hiroshima. Radioactive ash rained over 7,000 square miles, covering nearby islands where no warning had been issued. Children played in the deadly dust, some even tasting it. And you can imagine the aftermath. It's been 7 decades since the bombing, and the Marshallese still suffer cancer and birth defects. The islands are completely denuded and hold very real dangers for the present and the future. And decades later, a dome was built as a band-aid solution over the debris. But let's be clear, it was always a temporary fix, waiting on a real cleanup plan that never came. Now cracks are showing, radiation is leaking, yet the US claims it has fulfilled its obligations, shifting responsibility to the Marshall Islands. For years, the US Army has been poisoning the Pacific and its surroundings, taking over land, violating people's rights,